Hello, everyone. Welcome to Canadian music in the 80s and 90s and more. The A part making it Canadian. Uh, Hope you like what you're seeing. If you do,
I
please
like that.
subscribe. Um, I'm happy to be joined by Tom. Let's see if hope I'm announcing this right. Treumuth.
That's close enough. Sure.
Okay. Um, Tom is a well-known name to me and should be to you too, because he's probably been involved in more Canadian music in the past 35 to 40 years than anybody I can think of. Um, I know I'm really getting into your podcast. How long you been doing that now? 2 years?
Pardon me.
How long you been doing your podcast now?
Well, actually, I started just around the COVID time when we all were looking for something to do, and what actually happened is I ended up getting a call from Gary Muth, who signed my band Treumuth that I put together in the '80s, and he said, "Tom, you should release this album." And I have a friend of mine, and he's running the Spotify Canada. He was general manager, and they just said to me, "You should do a podcast to go along with the release of your Treumuth album, and then just keep going because you've been in the business your whole life. You know everybody, so just keep going." And I'm now 50 episodes in, and I just love it because it's like, as you can see, we both enjoy and are passionate about music and talking to artists. And I know you love to talk, and so do I. I can talk all day about music, and because that's what I've been doing my whole life.
And well, you got started making music for starters.
Did
I think I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts. You made the first digital recording.
Yes, believe it or not, the very first one was us. We recorded our Treumuth album completely live in the studio, where we had to do a whole side of an album without making mistakes. And so I practiced for 2 years with my band, and we were fortunate that after practicing so long, yeah, there's a few errors on the album, but they're hard to hear. So technically, we brought up something called a SoundStream system from Salt Lake City, and we recorded that way. And we actually were no we were sort of told that we were the first ones ever to record that way, but Ry Cooder actually beat us out on the marketplace with his album. So technically, his album was released before ours, for those who are paying attention to that kind of detail.
That's amazing. And then well, I know you as a producer.
Yeah,
I guess the
by the way, that's how I got started, because Jack Richardson ended up being my mentor, along with Gary Furness. The two of us, he's now the president of Sony Music Publishing. We got started that way because we went to Jack, and I talked my way into getting a co-production credit with Jack, because he acknowledged the fact that I had done all the arrangements and spent 2 years of my life practicing. So he was kind enough to say, "Okay, Tom, I'm going to give you a co-production," knowing that it would mean everything to me. And so that was sort of my waving the flag and going, "Hey, look at everybody. Jack Richardson, who's produced all the Guess Who records, and Bob Seger, et cetera, et cetera. He just gave me a co-production credit. So I know what I'm doing too as a producer."
And I was listening, I had reading up on you. You first got to start by watching them produce a Peter Gabriel album.
That's very true. As a matter of fact, it was him and Bob Ezrin that were in the Nimbus 9 studio, and Gary and I went into I guess we were allowed to observe. And next thing we know, we're sitting in a darkened control room, and I'm staring out, and we're told to sit on the floor and, not make a sound, because the lights were all off everywhere in the control room and in the recording area. And I see Peter Gabriel sitting there on the stool. He just shaved his head, and he had a light bulb, just a stark light bulb over his head, and that was the only light anywhere. And that just turned my head around completely, where I said, "Okay, let me get this straight. I can do this for a living, and somebody's going to pay me, and I'm going to be able to sit here and work with artists. You got to be kidding," because that's what I want to do. So that was the sort of the career changing highlight for me, where I just knew that, okay, I'm pursuing this. This is
That's
what I'm
some
going to.
that's some pretty serious guys to get started with. Jack Richardson and Bob Ezrin, like two of probably the greatest
Like I
producers.
said, it meant everything to get that credit with Jack, and he was just that kind of a guy. He just realized this, we're talking about credits meaning everything in those days. You had a credit on a big record, and you were laughing. So That was catapulted my credibility, we'll say, immediately. And the fact that Warner Brothers released the album and I was the keyboard player, and I'm a pretty good keyboard player, so that really helps me as a producer. And we can talk about that as well, because I've always been heavily involved in the arrangements because of my keyboard knowledge. Um, so that really helped me too, to entice bands to get involved with me, because I could also jam along with them, and they could also go and listen to the record and go, "Oh, this guy's no slouch. He knows how to play."
I was about to say that really does help a lot as a producer when you can play yourself, like you know what you're doing in terms of playing the music too.
Absolutely does. Yeah.
Um, so
Yes.
yeah, my first time seeing your name on a record, I guess, when I was 14 years old and bought Honeymoon Suite's first album on cassette, and I saw your name in the producer credits, and they had just won the contest at Q107 for the homegrown.
Yes. Well, would you like me to tell my little brief version of what went down there? Because I've been
Please do.
asked
Yeah.
a million times, and I'm glad to talk about it. Well, the long story short is that my parents bought me enough gear that I can put gear in a house that they were allowing me to live in, and I had a laundry chute where I put my cables down from my TAC 4-track, and I was able to basement and record New Girl Now. And of course, that recording, that really basic 4-track recording, ended up, I think we mixed it then later at Phase One or something, and that ended up winning the contest. And of course, I went along for the ride because everybody said, well, this guy Tom seems to know what he's doing. Let's give him a shot. And so Bob Roper, who was the A&R person at that time, and I owe him everything because he gave me the shot to continue with the band and say, let's make this record. And of course, we all know what happened. It had 4 top 10 singles on it, which just flew up the charts, and all of a sudden my career is on fire. The band's career is on fire. And till this day, it's the biggest record that I've worked with as far as sales go. I think it's closing in on 500,000 now in Canada, which is crazy because I've got triple and quadruple platinum albums already on my walls here at home. So am I super proud of it? Of course. It's one of those magical moments where everything just came into play in sync. Great songs, great band, great studio, great team, great label. Everything was in place.
And they went on to great success. And you worked with them again, didn't you, on Monsters Under the Bed? Or
Well, no, I came back many years later and I worked on an album called Clifton Hill. And
oh, right, okay.
ironically, I ended up coming back and managing the band as well. Many years later, I think I maybe managed them for 5 or 6, 7 years, and I was also a booking agent at that time, as I've done everything in my career. So I was managing them, booking them, and then I also produced that record, which just got re-released, I think, last year, where they remixed it now because it's 15 years ago or so, and you can make songs and albums sound a lot better these days with the new technology and et cetera. So I had no issue with that, and it sounds great. So that I came back and I did that record, Monsters Under the Bed. Bruce Fairbairn followed me on the
Yeah.
next record, Big Prize, and then I'm trying to think of if it was Ted Templeman or not, the next one.
Yeah, it
But
was the Racing After Midnight or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
right. And of course, I've stayed very tight with the band. They're great guys. Great. Johnny's one of my favorite singers on the planet. Just love his voice. And I'm so proud of them for continuing, and their fan base is growing now. It's bigger than ever.
I know they're still quite a good live, they're a popular live act still today.
Absolutely are. Yeah.
And I think that's where you make, well, I'm convinced that's the one of the biggest parts of being in having a band is still going out there and playing for audiences.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit to the reason it was also successful. The record is because I recorded them, very live off the floor. That ended up being my sort of trademark because I followed that with Helix. And I recorded them live off the floor, and ended up doing 4 albums for them, and all of them went, double platinum and great around the world. So what I'm saying is that both Honeymoon Suite and Helix, which were my first 2 big, yeah, there you go, fantastic, yeah, that's it. So what I'm basically saying is these were great live bands and still are today. I mean, Brian and the remaining Helix members, they're still a great band, period. And so is Honeymoon Suite.
For sure. And you've worn every hat possible in the music business. You've managed, you've run your own label.
Uh, as a matter of fact, Alan, before I came on, I was trying to think of if there's anything I haven't done in the business, and I honestly couldn't think of anything. I think I've done everything, including booking bands, writing songs. I was signed as a songwriter to RCA when I co-wrote some of the songs on a Gypsy Rose album with Gene Simmons, which was a highlight of my career. That was a hard rock metal band that I play keyboards on as well. And shit, I've done it all. I had my own label. I probably released a couple of hundred albums on my label. I was known as a king of metal in Canada for years when I had Anvil and Cataclysm, Razor, all sorts of bands signed to my label. Shit, I've done it all. It's just been a tremendous ride for me, and I'm still plugging away here with my podcast now and reminiscing. And who knows, I might jump back in the business still. But the business is so completely different now than when I started that I would not get involved for money because there is no money. The money so much later now. You have to be really, really, but that's another story. I could talk hours about that. But anyway, so back to my career. Yes, I've done it all. And to sum it up, I've done it all.
It's head spinning to think about all the changes that you talk about in the way it's all done nowadays. Like you were
Yes.
talking about the live off the floor thing with Honeymoon Suite and Helix, and you
Yeah.
having to practice so hard to record your first album live in the
Yeah.
studio and do it digitally. It's just something
Correct.
that's not done anymore, I don't think. Or if it is, not many do.
Well, I'll mention one thing about that is I think there's a movement back toward that. And I'll tell you why is I just listened to the new Black Crowes record, and it sounds to me like they recorded it live off the floor. I can just
Right.
tell. I'm obviously, so experienced. I can tell when a recording comes on, whether the players are in the same room or not. Pretty well, I'm going to say I'm pretty accurate with that. I can tell a lot of that was recorded live, and because there's, it just has that live feel of the room, etc. So I personally gravitate toward those kinds of records, and I ended up
Yeah.
making more of those as I went along in my career. I produced, the band Autographs bed tracks, for example, because I was known for capturing a band live off the floor. I just came in and did the bed tracks. Then I ended up doing this album called Smash Palace for CBS, again, live off the floor in Toronto at Phase One. So I became known for that sort of trademark, we'll say, as well as my arrangement chops. Back to what I said earlier, where because I'm a keyboard player, I'm really knowledgeable with theory.
I've been studying a lot. You mentioned Phase One Studios. I've been reading up a lot on some of Canada's great recording studios.
Yeah.
I saw a neat little documentary done about Little Mountain Sound out in Vancouver, and of course, Morin Heights in Quebec was always a big one. And Phase
Yeah.
One was right up there, I think. And then I guess you could throw Metalworks in there as well. Did you
Oh,
work
yeah,
at a lot of those studios?
absolutely. I've worked in them all. Phase One particularly was for me kind of magical because it had a great drum sound, and that was
Yeah,
because we opened up the back bay, and that was sort of a trick that became also almost common knowledge after a while. But those were sort of tricks that I would often use. Is I would never use a studio where I couldn't get a great drum sound, for example. So yes, Metalworks was great. It is great. Phase One, I don't know if they're still going or not. Tons of great records. There was a few others in downtown Toronto, but I tended to gravitate more toward, two or three. And once I got used to the room and the studio,
yeah.
I ended back there as opposed to trying new ones. Now, of course, I've also worked in LA and New York many times, in England and various other studios. But yeah, Phase One has a special sort of, meaning for me that it put me on the map. And again, that's where Honeymoon Suite also recorded their album. So that's always going to be special for me.
Now you were talking about I love listening to your podcast. It's fantastic just
Thank,
hearing your
thank you.
it's
So,
like I'm happy to be able to pick your brain here today. It's awesome.
and I love talking. So
Um the other one I want to bring up, not just all the things you've done, like you said, you've done just about everything. What about the people you come into contact over the years. I mean, there's got to be there's probably too many to mention, but you must be absolutely, you must be mind blown about all the people you've gotten to work with or come into contact with.
Yeah, I mean, let's say I think still one of the highlights for me will be my association with Gene Simmons, because that was really special when Gene was calling me on the phone literally every day when I was producing, because I was producing the band Gypsy Rose, and it ended up being signed to Gene Simmons's label called Simmons Records, and it was distributed by RCA, and I was a talent scout for RCA in New York at that time. So Gene and I became so tight that he would literally call me after a show. He'd be playing, Madison Square Garden, wherever, and go, hey, my wife would pick up the phone and go, it's Gene on the phone. And this went on for like a couple of months, and he'd want to know about the songs. He wanted to know how things were going, and he was checking in. And I'll never forget, he never really talked about the music, but always the lyrics. And
Yeah.
so this was a really fascinating time for me. And then I had the privilege of being invited down to his home in LA and seeing him. And he put me in the first row of, I guess, the LA Forum or whatever it was. And I got to hang out with him in the back dressing room and that. And this was a really special time. This is also the era when CDs were selling 5 and 10 million copies. There was
Yeah.
cool record stores everywhere. What a time this was. So and I met all sorts of people through Gene, because again, Gene knows everybody. So that is definitely one of my highlights, as well as going to New York very regularly for 5 years, because I was a talent scout for RCA, for a guy named Bob Buziak, who was the president, who took a liking to me. And then, that opened up all sorts of doors for me. I got stories that there will be a book coming at some point for me, where it's not like I became super famous, but let me put it this way. I succeeded on all the goals that I had as a kid. And, I didn't end up being, a household name in the production world, but enough people know me and are proud of my work, and I am as well, that I've had a real blessed life, because I followed my passion, and I just love music so much. It's been 24/7 music and having a family, and that's pretty well been my life. I've got nothing to complain about.
Well, I mean, I put you up on that, uh, up on that pedestal because I mean, I
Well,
always
thank
I
you
talk a
again.
lot about what much music did for Canadian music back in the early days, because they gave a lot of bands a lot of exposure they never would have got, and I always like the way they used to mix them in with everybody.
Yep.
Like, I mean, you'd see the
Oh,
top
absolutely.
artists of the day, and you'd see a Colin James or Jeff Healey video mixed in, or a Honeymoon Suite video. And growing up, I didn't know any better. I thought they were just as big as superstars as anybody was.
Well,
And
you're absolutely right. That was the era where I mean, you could literally become a star overnight. And I was fortunate, because I also worked with bands that did get a lot of support there. And I'll mention a couple of others that I'm so proud of. Big Sugar, who I found Gordy Johnson playing in a club with Molly Johnson singing, and I ended up signing Big Sugar. There, we did a video called "Sleep In Late," and that went immediately on Much Music, and everybody noticed him. And next thing you knew, he was opening for Aretha Franklin at Massey Hall, and et cetera. And I just had Gordy on my podcast. By the way, I'll be dropping that soon. That was really fascinating. But I also worked with the Spoons. I did an album called Bridges Over Borders for them, and they were on MTV as well, because we got a U.S. release on that record, which I was really proud of as a producer, because I was told to make sure the album was more of a rock album. So I ruffled a few feathers probably by doing that with some of their fans. But the point I'm making is, this was the MTV Much Music era, where
yeah,
if you made a good record and you had a label behind you, you could really make some serious noise around the world. Now, of course, it's down to the social media aspect, which, again, I can go on for hours about that, where unfortunately, in my opinion, the music has taken second place to social media, because now you
right.
can't even get arrested. You can't even get anybody to notice you right now unless you have social media numbers. Now that's unfortunate.
I mean, it's a mixed opinion. I don't know. I'm not the experienced music guy that you are, other than being a
Sure.
big fan. But I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's a mixed bag. Like, if you want to find it, you can find it. Like, if you're looking for Big Sugar, you can find it just by going on your computer and looking for it.
Yeah.
And
No, no, that's true. The point I'm making, I think, Alan, is if I was a brand new band now
right,
starting out, compared to those days where you had MTV and Much Music and you had all these other visual avenues open to you.
Right.
Um, it's just so hard to get started now. And I have this question asked to me constantly. And I ask people that come on my podcast as well, and everybody shrugs. Like, I don't know what to do. Nobody knows, because it's like a wild, wild west out there. And now, of course, don't get me started on AI, because that's now opened up all
Yeah.
sorts of things, and we can talk. That'd be a whole separate podcast on that. So my point is, I hope the era that I was part of will return, in the sense of, you have to play your instruments great, and you should
Yeah.
go out and play live and record live in the studio. I hope that comes back.
It's hard to stand out, I guess. Is that what you mean as well? It's hard to really stand out among all the stuff that's thrown at you.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And you have to be original, and it's tough to be original. Or if you're not original, you have to write great songs. Now, is there a school to write great songs? No.
No.
You can write a great song. Ask Derry how to write a great song. He's written a ton of them.
Yeah, it's for sure. Like, and he's just, well, but you go back to, like you said,
Ask,
they're very talented.
ask Burton Cummings how to write a great song. There's tons of people that know how to do it, but it's a magical experience, and some people never can, for whatever reason. So that's a whole other world where, I think there's not enough time spent on crafting a song, let's say, and learning what a great song is. And of course, melody is king. So here I'm
Yeah.
going off on my tangent here, but I've always been a melody person. And every project that I've worked with, more or less, has had great melodies. So I'm proud of that.
In terms of the like today you can throw stuff together so fast when it comes
Yes.
to
Oh,
recording and stuff like that. You don't, and like you said, you don't even have to be in the same room anymore. But do
no.
you, do you prefer the way everybody kind of worked on it together in the same room, or do you prefer? I mean, you can do it this way. I mean, obviously everybody does it like that.
Alan, I was always one of those producers, and I'll tell you, just the way that I worked was, when I had 5 individuals in a band, I would go through them all and ask their opinion, and I would just pick the ones that I thought were great. So I would involve everybody. So if I had an arrangement idea, or I say to a band, guess what, that bridge sucks. We got to rework that bridge. I would ask everybody's opinion, and I don't give a shit whose idea worked. I
Yeah,
get credit for it. I was a producer. So if I picked, let's say, the bass player's best idea for the bridge, I'd go, let's use it. That's great. Perfect. I had no ego about that. I didn't give a shit who came out with a part, but I would involve everybody. So my point is, you can't beat that kind of magic when you're all around a room and you listen to
yeah,
a play. You all go, holy shit, that sounds really good, but we can make it better still. What do we do? And you collaborate, and you sit around in the room and you discuss it, and then you go back out and you capture that energy. See, to me, it's about energy, and I'm not criticizing anybody who does anything at home, because of course there's some great recordings and albums that have come out that way. Of course there is.
right,
But on a personal level, the ones that I find that last the test of time, for me personally, are the ones that have been recorded more live, like the 80s and 90s, where the bands were in the same room communicating with each other. And there's a certain magic when the red light goes on, okay, everybody's just raised their level to make sure that it's great. If that all
right,
makes
totally. You mentioned Big Sugar. I mean, there's a
sense.
band that, to me, in their early recordings, really sounded like they were playing live off the floor. Like they almost sounded
I,
like a
I,
live
I,
band.
well, I produced the first record, Alan, and I recorded them live off the floor. And here's the story, and I'll tell you the 10-second version of it, because it's on the Gordy podcast coming up. Is I saw them play in a club, and they were so entertaining and so energetic that I set up my studio with tables and chairs to simulate a bar. And I put glasses out and everything, except don't touch them. You can drink, but really quietly. So, and then I brought in an audience. That's the way the first Big Sugar album was recorded. And that was my way of, I guess, my production, you can call it technique or whatever, is to try to get the best atmosphere, to try to capture the band live. Because if you're great live, really hard to get that the studio when you're doing things individually, and somebody's in another room, somebody's sitting in another part of the world doing it. It's not the same. Now, it doesn't mean it's not great. Still, it is, in a certain different way, but I
Right.
prefer the energy way, and energy is captured by individuals together in a room. And the room
Right.
sound also has a lot to do with it. The Big Sugar albums, and I'll mention the 500 Pounds album quickly because Jack White just called it the best blues record to ever come out of Canada, which was overwhelming for me and Gordy to see that. Um, these are albums captured in a live room where the sound of the room is also important. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? So it makes it sound like, oh, wow, these guys recorded in a really cool room as opposed to adding it artificially. So, I'm getting a little technical here and I might get over some people's heads, but the point I'm making is nothing beats the energy of recording live. And some of the records from the 80s today still sound incredible, as do some from the 70s and 60s. And
Hmm.
they were recorded live. We'll get back to the Beatles. All that shit was done live.
Awesome. Yeah, 500 Pounds is one of my favorite records of all time. I still listen to it a lot today. Um, well, I've gotten to know the band Whiskey Jack a little bit over the years. I don't know if you know them. Um,
I've Yes,
Al Cross was playing drums for them for a while, and I got to know Al a little bit.
phenomenal. Yep.
Yeah, and I found it funny. One show we saw Whiskey Jack, I was talking to them at the side of the stage before they went on, and they were playing 500 Pounds over the loudspeaker. And I'm like, you played on that, didn't you?
Is that right?
So I was like, that's kind of interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about a guy who's played every kind of music too.
Yeah. Well, another thrill for me has always been to hear stuff that I produced on the radio or somewhere like that happens to me, a fair bit, particularly the honeymoon suite stuff with, again, I'll circle back to that as lots of times because, I still hear a new girl now constantly, when I go up and I'm driving around, particularly, up north or somewhere. And I go, again, it's the power of great songs, even Big Sugar, their songs weren't pop, they didn't get
No.
on,
Yeah.
let's say, but they're great songs. That's all, so again, my production technique has been, you know, um, great band, great studio, and number one, great songs. And then your job is so much easier. And that's why, uh, on my podcast and that I often will focus on, artists that have stood the test of time because their songs are still great and they sound great today because the melodies are strong and so are some of the lyrical hooks. So there you go. So there's my sort of, and it's all very simplistic to say, write a great song. But again, um, they're just, for me, that the era we're living in right now, I just don't hear the quality of the great songs.
Right.
I'm showing my age a little bit, but um, with the exception of some on the radio, I just find that a lot of them just sound too much the same. There's not enough, clever arrangements going on or things to
Right.
keep my interest. They all sound the same. So, maybe it's age related. I'll keep listening to the old stuff. Thank you. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. I don't want to sound like an old fart, if you will, just because I like all the old stuff still. But
Yeah.
like, I'm happy to see that almost every band you said you've worked with is still out there doing it today, though. So that's got to be said something to say for that.
Yeah, you know what? Pretty well, almost all of them have, even in the metal world, because I also work with bands like Voivod, which I was extremely proud of. They
Mhm.
were, and to me, pioneers of that sort of thrash metal movement, and they're building their fan base like crazy. Finally, after 30 years, and I was there to sign them when they had a little bit of turmoil with their career, and so. I'm a very, very proud of that time of my life where I did a lot of hard rock and metal, and those bands are still going. Anvil is another one where I released 5 albums on my label, and people laughed at me and said, "What the fuck are you hanging around with Anvil for? That those guys are like cartoon characters." And yes, they are, but they're great cartoon characters, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're great in their own way, and they had great metal riffs, we'll say. And again, back to songs, riffs are also songs in that world. So when you have a great riff and a couple of cool lyrical lines, you got a great song in that world. And they had some, and they still do. And they had that movie come out, and I was the one who got them
Yeah.
their deal in Japan when they played the Budokan there. That was me who put that deal together. So again, back to I've done it all. I've done all kinds of music, jazz not so much, country not so much. I've done some of that, but I focus mostly on, I guess, rock and metal and hard rock. I guess those have been sort of my specialties. And again, circling back to and most of all of the bands that I worked with many years ago are still in some configuration going today. So I'm proud of that. Sure.
No, yeah, Anvil, I think I got a big resurgence, I guess, when that documentary came out, which was absolutely fantastic. Even if you didn't like the band, it was a great documentary. And there seems
Absolutely.
to be a lot of good documentaries coming out lately.
Yeah,
I mean,
agreed.
there was a good one about Spirit of the West. I don't know if you're a fan of theirs or not. There was a good one
Yeah.
about the Hip. Um,
Can't keep track of them all, but there's a lot of them coming now. And as a matter of fact, I've told Helix to put one out because I think they have a great, what is it? They're closing in on 40 or is it 50 years? I mean, they've been out there for a long time. And I said to Brian, you should do a great documentary, and he is. So that'll be an interesting one too, because I'm going to be a big part of it because I was there for 4 albums. Triumph did a great one.
yep. Rush.
Rush did a great one.
Yep.
Yeah, there'll be more coming, and they should. These are acts we should be proud of. The Canadian music scene has been amazing. I've been thrilled to live here, and I've been courted to go to New York and LA years ago, and I always stuck it out here. I mean, we have fantastic talent here.
That's what I was actually going to ask. Did you ever live down in the States at all? Or did you always stay in Canada?
Well, I always stayed in Canada, but I ended up, like I said, going to New York and LA a lot for, I'll say, about 10 or 15 years. So, I was
Mhm.
there maybe once a month or so. I also managed an act called Kazzer, what was a hip hop artist, and I got him signed to CBS Sony in New York. So I ended up touring all over the States and Europe with Kazzer. He was one of the biggest signings ever for a Canadian artist, and he had a song called Pedal to the Metal, which blew up
Mhm.
and was everywhere. So again, I should mention him just briefly because that was a hip hop artist that I also got involved with in management. So again, I've also worked with Lee Aaron for, I guess, 5 or 6 years. I was co-managing her. I didn't end up producing anything for her musically, but I was involved behind the scenes, helping pick songs and things. And Karen will be on my podcast coming up shortly as well for those who want to check that out, because she's a iconic female singer that, to me is, we should all be proud of her. She was one of the first ones to
Sure.
hit the stage and start wailing some amazing vocal that that became worldwide known for. Of course, maybe not the song she wanted to be known because she's called Metal Queen, but
Right.
you know carved herself out a fantastic, wonderful career. So kudos to her.
And she's still doing it today. So that's
But
another.
she's great live. She's a wonderful person. Again, circling back to what we talked about earlier. Again, I worked with her for 5 or 6 years, co-managing, and she's still out there. So there's a number of Canadian acts that they're going to keep going right to the end. They're lifers. They have it in their DNA. Like I've had in my DNA. I've been a music oriented person my whole life, and I thank whoever put that DNA in my body, because circling back to the beginning, I've done everything I've ever wanted to do, and am now able to reminisce with some of these acts that have become my friends again, we'll say, or it's just a great feeling. I'm very privileged and honored to have been part of the Canadian music scene. It's wonderful.
Are we going to see a documentary about you?
Well, I'm gonna say this. I was gonna write a book because making the world's first digital recording, even that's kind of a bit of a nice read for those people that are interested in that kind of
Right.
thing. Because that was really an interesting moment in time where the technology that came from that was the start of it, where
Yeah.
recording now is the way everybody records and has been for years. But we were right there. We want to call us pioneers. We kind of were in that essence. So I want to talk about that, and just the fact that I managed to carve out a career doing everything I loved and wearing every hat there is to wear in the music business, and having a great time doing it and making a living from it. I think people would find that interesting, because I always tell people to follow their dreams, and you don't have to be super successful to have a career. Yes, I was successful, but I wasn't, I didn't have like million sellers like times 10 or something where I could retire. I've
Right.
always had to work for a living, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. As a matter of fact, I've pinched myself almost every day and going, am I doing this and somebody's paying me? This is crazy. I love it so much.
And that's the thing that shows when you listen to your podcast. You listen
Thanks.
to the way you talk about it. You can hear the passion in what you do, and you wouldn't be doing it this long if you didn't.
Say that, and I again, I'm so happy for you to have me on, because I love talking, and I'm proud of the Canadian music industry so much as well. And I'm like, again, I don't want to sound like an old fart, but I'm rooting for more rock bands as well. Like, I'm a rock
Right.
guy. Sure, I like Billie Eilish like everybody else does, and I like some others, and there's some Canadian artists that I do like, of course, that are current. But I do wish we would go back to having some more rock bands, and just music could get a little more adventurous for me. I hate the way that people are scared. Artists are probably scared to be too unique or innovative because they won't get accepted, and I don't like that. I want it to be back to the way it was, where you can be more experimental, and you'll get support. So there's my wish, and I'm looking. And if anybody's out there wants to contact me that thinks they're doing something really unique, I'll listen. I can't guarantee I'll be able to help you, but I'll listen. And you know, there you go.
And
I'm
like
a music.
my
I'm
parents always told me, everything old is new again,
yes,
especially when
yes,
it comes to movies and TV shows, because all they're doing is going back to the well for the old stuff. So,
yes. Well, everything does recycle, and I'm going to say this very interesting comment that Gene made a few years ago. He thought rock was dead. Well, I'm going to actually argue with Gene. I don't think rock is dead. I just think it's not. It hasn't come back to being on our radar enough yet. It's still bubbling under, but I think there's going to be more rock coming, because that's a live performance-based music. You have to be good at playing. You have to learn your instruments. You can't just sit around on your computer. And I think more people
right.
are going to want. So I'm going to argue against you, Gene, if you're listening, and he might be. Who knows? Um, Rock is not dead, and there you go. Let's and thanks for Honeymoon Suite for making another great record. So again, I think I've circled back to them 5 times now, but deservedly so.
Deservedly so, yeah. I can't thank you enough for joining me today, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love showing people like you who, you might not be a household name, but they've heard what you've done. Everybody's heard what you've done, that's for sure. I can sit there and say, that's him. He did that. That's him right there. You don't know his name, but you know what he's done. I can guarantee it.
That's
So,
great.
and that's the stories I like to bring out. I
Well,
like,
thank you for those nice, kind words, Alan. I really appreciate that. Makes my day, because I'm still as passionate as I ever was, and I'm glad to talk to somebody as passionate as myself, which seems to be you as well. You seem to be right, on top of everything going on from the past and in the future coming up. And thank you for also your support in doing your really great podcast as well, and helping support the scene.
oh, it's been a pleasure. I never dreamt I'd be able to do this. I can't believe the people I've talked to already, and you're on that list for sure. It's great to talk to you. And
Thank
hopefully
you.
hopefully this won't be the last time. Hopefully we'll talk about your documentary one day or your book.
I'd be thrilled to.
All right, thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks for joining
Okay.
me.
Cheers.